Welcome, everybody, to our first Tim at 10 of 2023. It's been a while since we've done one of these, so I'm super excited to be with everyone today as we go over these incredible changes to the child care minimum standards. Hopefully everyone is getting logged in okay. Hopefully everyone is safe from the weather that we had yesterday afternoon. That got a little scary out there, didn't it? So hopefully everyone is doing okay with that. All right. We're going to go ahead and just jump on in here because we've got a lot to talk about in our short time today. Hopefully you have a copy of the Child Care Minimum Standards in front of you. If you don't have a copy of the standards, that's okay. You can just listen and follow along. But if you do have access to this, it would probably be helpful and more meaningful for you if you do have it. Make sure that you have the most current minimum standards, which is the one that has March of 2023 at the bottom. All right, so these just came out earlier this week. They were just published. We knew they were coming. This is no surprise to anyone. They're actually a little late with publishing this document. We've known since about this time last year that these standards were coming, and then we had a little bit of some revisions back in September of 2022 to the proposed rule changes, and now boom, here they are. We've got our final draft that's coming out right there. All right, look at all these amazing people hopping on. Good morning, good morning, good morning to all of you. Yes, I've missed our Tim at 10, so we're going to try to get these going a little bit more. It's just been so busy here lately. Y'all stop making me work so much. No, it's all good. Okay, so like I said, none of the material that we're going to talk about today should be a surprise to anyone. Like I said, we've known for over a year that these were coming, and there's really, in my opinion, nothing that we're going to talk about today that is going to rock your world, all right? I'm willing to guess that most of you are already meeting and exceeding everything that we're going to talk about today. All right. And I know that so many of you run very high quality early education programs and after school programs. Y'all have got this. All right. I think that there's one little section of this material that might come down to some interpretation concerns, but once again, hopefully I'll give you some information today to help clarify that so that we can move forward with meeting the needs of the children. All right, so why do we have these changes in the minimum standards? Well, child care regulations is required to do a comprehensive review of the minimum standards every 6 years. So the last time we had this was in 2016. We had quite a bit of changes back in 2016, both with the comprehensive review, but then also with some federal mandates. And then 6 years later is 2022, so it was just time for them to do their comprehensive review of the minimum standards, and here they are, all right? So this really has nothing to do with the pandemic. It has nothing to do with, they just want to make our life difficult. No, it doesn't have anything to do with that. It was just time for the comprehensive review of the standards, and they were able to do that. All right, so that's why we've got this. And so I'm going to kind of go through this. And today's webinar is just to make you aware of the rule changes. We'll talk a little bit about, how you can comply with this. I've got some other webinars planned in the very, very near future that is going to piggyback on some of this material. And I'll kind of talk about that whenever we get to it. All right. I was so excited to do this webinar today. I just jumped right on in. I should probably tell y'all how this works, right? Because again, it's been a while since we've done a Tim at 10. You can just listen, you can participate, you can ask questions or comments in the comment screen. You don't have to give me your name, you don't have to give me an email address or how many people are watching. We can see that here on Facebook Live. At the end of the webinar today, for those of you that are wanting a certificate of completion for instructor-led training, I will post a link for you to complete a little quiz about the material today. And then there's a $5 fee for a certificate if that's what you're needing. I will post that at the end of the webinar today. All right. Otherwise, you just enjoy and learn and plan on how you're going to make all this stuff happen in your school. All right. So that's how it works right there. Okay. All right. So, like I said, if you have a copy of your standards, that would be helpful. The March 2023 version. If you don't, it's okay. Just listen and take notes. All right. So going to page 12 of the standards, when we talk about what do certain words and terms mean in this chapter, once again, they did quite a bit of clarification to some of the terms and the definitions. You know, this has been going on for a little while now, several years now, where in order to eliminate a lot of the interpretation concerns, they've really been cleaning up the terms and definitions. And this has been so extremely helpful for providers, for inspectors, for everyone above. And they've done a fabulous job at that. Once again, you're going to see just a little bit more cleanup on some of the words, some of the terms and definitions. And then just some clarification. There are a couple of additions to terms and definitions that you're going to see, but once again, nothing that's going to rock your world. All right. But on page 12, number 1, where it talks about an activity plan, that is your written plan that outlines the daily routine and activities in which a group of children will engage while in your care. We've always had activity plans. We've always been responsible for following an activity plan. That is not anything new. What we're going to see today is it's going to talk about making modifications and accommodations to children with special care needs, and that's going to tie into your activity plan. So just for clarification purposes, we've got that in our terms and definitions. And what you're going to see here is where it says the plan is designed to meet the children's cognitive, language, social, emotional, and physical development strengths and needs. Y'all, this is fantastic, and you're going to see this a few times with these amendments to the minimum standards, where they're really drilling down on the individual child and how we need to focus and meet the needs of the individual child, which is great, right? And you know, I'm all about that, especially the social and emotional side of it, the ability to practice resiliency skills with the children. It's so desperately needed. So I was so excited that there's a focus on this piece with these updates. So that's what you're going to see there. Also on number 6, where it talks about what is age appropriate. Once again, piggybacking on that same conversation, activities, equipment, materials, curriculum, and environment, including the child's assigned classroom, that are developmentally consistent with the development or the chronological age of the child that is being served. Once again, we're putting a focus on the individual child rather than a group of children, which is great. All right. So, yeah, and kind of going on Donna's comment right here, we're going through the 746 book, which is the licensed child care centers. There are the same changes to registered homes and to after-school programs. For the sake of today's webinar, we're going to be going off of the 746 book. But if you are in a registered home or if you are in an exclusive after-school program, meaning you're following the 744 or the 747 book, reference that book, and you're probably going to see the very same or similar wording changes. Okay, so thank you for reminding me of that clarification. All right. Over on page 13, once again with terms and definitions where it talks about a lifeguard. Any of y'all that may have a swimming pool, a body of water greater than 2 feet, then you're just going to see on the lifeguard, it is going to say that their lifeguard certificate is current and is relevant to the type of water activity in which the children will engage. All right, so if they just have a generic lifeguard certification, it needs to be a little bit more specific to whatever it is that you're doing in your school. We don't have a lot of people that have swimming pools. I have a swimming pool at one of my locations that is about to get filled in because it's just a pain in the hiney. All right, but if you do have a lifeguard, that's what you're going to want to focus on right there. Something else on this same page, number 19, where it talks about a contract service provider. You're going to see some clarification on requirements, training requirements, those type of things for volunteers, substitutes, and contract service providers. Again, this is not anything new, it's just clarification. But a contract service provider is a person or entity contracted with the operation to provide a service, whether paid or unpaid is irrelevant. All right, so a lot of times people will even ask me, we have this person that's coming in and performing a service for our classroom, but it's a volunteer, they're not being paid. You still have to meet the qualifications. So the fact that they're paid or unpaid is irrelevant. All right. And so when we talk about a contract service provider, that would be like your dance or your gymnastic or your sports, those type of individuals that is coming in. All right. I see some people. Thank you, Letitia, for posting the link for the PDF for the standards. That was very helpful. Thank you. And I see Tanya is asking again. So Tanya, just look up. All right. Letitia just shared that with us. Of course, you can also just search your internet engine for Texas Child Care Minimum Standards, and it's the first thing that pops up. All right. Over on page 14, where it talks about grounds, you're going to see, again, just clarification that there is no difference between grounds and premises. All right, so your parking lot, your sidewalks, your playground, your yard, your building, that's all part of your grounds and your premises. And so you've got that in there. Hazardous materials, any substance or chemical that is a health hazard or physical hazard as determined by the Environmental Protection Agency, also referred to as toxic materials or toxic chemicals. So really good clarification on that one right there. Let's go over to page 16, where it talks about sanitizing. So once again, we've got some clarification on sanitizing. If you are using a non-bleach chemical to do your disinfecting and sanitizing, once again, they are just stressing that it has to have instructions for sanitizing. And y'all, that's important. If it says instructions for disinfecting, that's not acceptable. All right. It has to have instructions for sanitizing. All right. So you want to make sure you look at that. And then when it talks about the process, it used to be the 4-step process. Now it's a 5-step process if you are using a bleach product. All right. So if you're using a chemical that is registered with the Environmental Protection Agency that has instructions for sanitizing, then that's what you're going to follow the manufacturer's instructions. If you're using a bleach product, okay, so you're like stuck in the 1970s and you're still using bleach, then you're going to follow the process down here. Wash it with water and soap, rinse it with clear water, soak it or spray it with a bleach solution. So they kind of changed the word right there, for at least 2 minutes. And then here's an addition. Rinsing it with cool water, only those items that children are likely to place in their mouths, and then allow it to air dry. Okay, so, but I think most of you are using an alternate chemical that is registered with the Environmental Protection Agency, and you're following the instructions for sanitizing. And that's what most people are doing right there. All right. Okay, over on page 17, where it talks about special care needs. All right, we're going to have a lot of conversation about this. So take a deep breath, be patient. All right, let's kind of get through this conversation. This particular topic has created a lot of anxiety with a lot of folks. Let me go ahead and simplify this for you. What you're going to see in here about special care needs is nothing different than what we've always been required to do. This all falls in line with the Americans with Disability Act and the requirements that we have with the Americans with Disability Act. It's no different than what we've always been required to do. They're just putting it in the standards now. All right, so just breathe. You can handle this, and we're gonna talk about this more later on. So there you go. So when it talks about a special care need, a child with special care needs is a child who, and of course the A here, a chronic physical, developmental, behavioral, or emotional condition. That's kind of the same right there. They are adding in there the comprehension and the emotional regulation piece, which is good. We needed that in there. And then the B as in boy, a limitation due to an injury, illness, or allergy. So, I talk about this a lot when I do trainings on supporting children with signs and symptoms of a special need. A lot of the special care needs are temporary special care needs. And so, that's what we want to take into consideration there. So you'll see that with the definition. All right. And again, we're going to talk a lot more about special care needs later on in the webinar. All right. On the state and local fire authority, just again expanding that definition, that a fire official who is authorized to conduct fire safety inspections on behalf of the city, the county, or the government, including certified fire inspectors. That was a good addition right here, because most of us, depending on where you live, the city and county that you live in, your local fire marshals aren't doing this anymore. You're having to hire a certified fire inspector, an outside agency to do this. So you're going to see that added right there. All right. On number 60, where it talks about weather permitting, you're going to see this 2 different times in these amendments. So basically you get the definition of what is weather permitting, and then you're going to see this again when we get to operating policies. So you need to put in your policies what sources you use to determine when children can go outside and when they should stay in. So basically you need to clearly define for your particular center what is weather permitting and how are you measuring that. All right. Now, again, every program is going to be a little bit different here. You may have shade structures, you may not have shade structures. You could have a lot of trees, you could have no trees. Also, just the climate of where you're at could be different. Weather permits in Amarillo is very different than weather permits in Laredo, right? And so what are the children used to? Those type of things. Again, you get to write this policy. You're just going to be a little bit more clear on how you're determining what is weather permitting. And again, you'll see this again when we get to the policies. I wanted to point out on page 18, under the help for or the technical assistance boxes, always make sure that you're reading these technical assistance boxes, the helpful information. Y'all, there's really good stuff in here that is very valuable, that is very helpful when operating your program. But they're going to talk about, again, the sanitizing. They're going to talk more about the Environmental Protection Agency. but I wanted to point out the bullet that's kind of right in the middle of the page right here, where it says the use of alternative methods for sanitizing and disinfecting, such as fogging, fumigation, and wide area or electrostatic spraying, are not recommended unless first approved by local or state public health departments. The CDC does not recommend the use of such methods in most cases. Okay, now y'all might remember back in the pandemic, those of you that are part of Texas Rising Star, depending on the area of the state that you're in, we actually got foggers. We got fumigation machines from TRS and from some other agencies to help us with our disinfecting and sanitizing practices. You want to make sure that those devices do not replace the expectation for sanitizing. All right, they're in addition to. All right, but they don't replace what is expected. Okay, so that's good clarification for us right there and very helpful. All right, over on page 19. All right, so on page 19, we're going to get into permit holder responsibilities here. Yes, so in addition to your regular process. So with your permit holder responsibilities, on number 5, okay, now again, any of y'all that have taken my director credential course, we talk about this in our director credential course, and I actually have an online training on my website on child abuse and neglect reporting expectations. And once again, we talk about this because this is all federal mandate right here. Licensing is just now adding this to the minimum standards, which is really nice. But when we talk about number 5, reporting and ensuring that your employees and volunteers report suspected abuse, neglect, and exploitation to the Texas Abuse and Neglect Hotline, you're going to see right there that an employer may not delegate the responsibility to make the report. All right, and y'all, this isn't anything new. This has always been part of the expectation, but you cannot delegate the reporting responsibility. So whoever suspects the abuse has to be the one to make the report. And then you're also going to see right here, you may not require an employee to seek approval to file a report. Okay, so you can't tell your employees that they are required to come to you first, right? You can recommend that they come and they speak to you, but you can't require it. All right, so I'm glad that they put that in here. That's very helpful as well. On your criminal background checks, on number 6, you're just going to see some language added that, information related to a criminal background check is kept confidential and is not disclosed to unauthorized persons. So we still kind of have an issue around the state with that right there. Okay. All right. And y'all, some of this stuff, I'm just going to tell you there was a change, but we're not going to really talk about it a whole lot. And then there's some stuff that's pretty generic across the board that I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on. So when we go to page 24, it's talking about what other situations require notification to licensing. On number 6, the occurrence of any other non-routine situation that places or may place a child at risk. Y'all, there's just some wording changing right there. They've added the non-routine situation or may place a child at risk. So just some wording right there. Same thing on 746-307 on page 26. On emergency situations that you notify parents. Same thing, just the wording of non-routine and may place a child at risk down there on number 4. So there you go. All right. All right, so over on page 28, where it's going to talk about what are the notification requirements when licensing finds my center deficient in a standard related to safe sleeping, or abuse, neglect, and exploitation. You're going to see this a few times throughout the book. It talks about how must I position an infant for sleep. So when you're putting an infant down for sleep, they have to be put up in a face-up position. So anytime it talks about putting an infant down for sleeping, you're going to see that wording change, that a face-up position. That's all that's been changed right here, and that's on number 5 on page 29. All right. On page 31, under 746.405, what telephone numbers must I post and where must I post them? You're just going to see poison control, and they're actually giving you a 1-800 number, 222-1222 for poison control. So just probably a good practice to go through your school, and anywhere you have your telephone numbers posted, just cross-reference that poison control. You might need to make a little adjustment right there. Okay. Yeah, so wherever you get your chemicals from for sanitizing, you're going to follow the manufacturer's instructions for sanitizing and make sure it's got that on there. All right, following up on that question. All right, under 746.501, what written operational policies must I have? Okay, so just a couple of little changes right here under operating policies. Let's go over to page 33. Number 18, the promotion of indoor and outdoor physical activities. Once again, on F as in Frank, you'll see the criteria you will use to determine when extreme weather conditions pose a significant health risk that prohibits or limits outdoor play. So that's what we talked about just about 5 minutes ago. So you'll just want to go to that policy you already have in your book and make sure that is outlined. All right. And then over on page 35, number 30, procedures for supporting inclusive services to children with special needs. So the policy must address the requirements outlined under 746.2202. And we're going to talk about those here in just a little bit. All right. But basically, you're going to have a policy on how you're going to support these children. And I'll talk about that later on. All right. Moving right along, we're just rocking and rolling here. All right, we're going to go now to record keeping, and we're going to go to the admissions information. So 746.605 on page 39 of the new standards. All right, and basically, actually go to page 40. Go one more page over because that's where we see the first change. A statement of the child's special care needs, which must include any limitation or restriction on the child's activities, special care the child requires, such as any reasonable accommodations or modifications, any adaptive equipment provided for the child, including instructions on how to use the equipment, and symptoms or indications of potential complications related to a physical, cognitive, or mental condition that may warrant prevention or intervention when the child is in care, and in any medication prescribed for continuous long-term use. So this is pretty specific now. You know, this used to be a pretty generic statement, and they've really drilled down on it to help us out. If you have a child that has been diagnosed with a disability or a special need, this is where we talk about the IEP, the Individual Education Plan. Very, very critical that you get a copy of that IEP from that family. And the IEP is going to list out all of the things that you see listed on page 40. You're probably going to make some changes to your enrollment form on this particular question or section of your enrollment form to be a little bit more specific right here. All right. And again, we'll talk about all of this stuff later on as well. But just when it comes to the child's special care needs, being very specific. And y'all, this is good. This is to protect us. All right. This is to help us. It is not meant to be a burden. It is not meant to add more stress or anxiety on your plate. This is to help us and protect us. So yeah, and you're probably going to have a little bit of resistance from families. You're going to have a little bit of pushback, but we got to do what's in the best interest of the child. Okay. And we're going to do a lot of trainings on this. We're going to do a whole lot of trainings on this year. Okay. So yes. All right. Over on page 40, also number 16, the child's allergies and a completed food allergy emergency plan. So they just kind of added the child's allergies, including the food allergy emergency plan. So not much of a difference right there. All right, going over to 746, 701 on page 48, record of accidents and incidents. So basically, again, very similar to when we talked about reporting expectations, any non-routine situation that may have placed a child at risk, that's the wording change you see right there. All right. Okay. Over on personnel records, so 746-901 on page 55. When we're talking about record of trainings, they've just added, including documentation required under 1329. So again, nothing new here, just a clarification for you. And we'll talk about that when we get to training records. All right, let's talk about you, the director. All right, what's going on in your world? What's changing here with you? Again, take a deep breath. You can handle this. It's nothing that you're not already doing. It's just in writing now, okay? So, on page 58, if you have multiple centers under the same governing body, you must designate a separate director for each operation. Y'all, this is not new. Okay, this is not new. So we've got that in there. Page 59 is the big one. Okay, this is where you need to take a deep breath. The director must be present at the operation, physically present. Your body has to be on your premises. The director must be present a minimum of 75% of the program's operating hours each week, or a minimum of 30 hours, whichever is less, to ensure compliance with the standards. Now, it is going to tell you unless the director is absent from the operation temporarily for a vacation or other personal time, so it's okay for you to still take time off, okay? And or the director is engaging in professional development activities related to their role of the director. So if you come to a training event, all right, that's okay. That's going to be counted right there. Now, I see there's already a comment on here. You're like, 75% of the operating hours or 30 hours a week? Yeah, I wish, most of us are already working, 45, 50 plus hours a week. So you're already exceeding this. Here's my huge piece of advice for y'all on this one. And y'all might be aware that over the last 2 years, this has been one of the top 10 deficiencies with the standards. You have to have a time card. Even though you're a salaried exempt employee, the director still has to have a time card, just like all of the other employees in the building. Being salaried is irrelevant. Okay, so what's going to be critical here is that you've got record of your time. This is where they're going to have the problem, all right? It's because people are not going to keep accurate time cards, and you're going to get in trouble for that. So make sure you've got a good system in place. You're signing in and out just like everybody else, and you've got record of your time, and I think you're going to be okay, all right? So yes, and y'all remember, this is a requirement by Texas Workforce Commission. This is a requirement by child care regulations. So you should already be doing this. All right. So I've had a lot of people express some anxiety over the 75% rule, and I'm like, really? Because you should be there. There you go. All right, over on page 67 under 1037, where it talks about may clock hours or CEUs be substituted for any of the hour requirements. They've just, again, a wording change where it talks about child development and management. So nothing new or critical right there. And if any of y'all ever have any questions about that particular standard, 1037, call me. And especially if you're trying to get your non-expiring director certificate, I can walk you through that. But that's a phone call, and I can help you out with that. All right. So yeah, just the director. That standard about the 75% rule was for the designated director. The designated director. All right. All right. Ooh, here we go. 746-1203, and I'm going to type that in because that's a good one. All right. 746-1203, starting on page 75. I'm just going to go ahead and put page 75 to page, and it goes on here. What are the general responsibilities of child care personnel? And y'all know, any of y'all that have come to my trainings, especially my director credential course, I tell y'all, this is my favorite chapter in the book. These are my favorite pages. I encourage y'all to go over, these pages at least once a year in your staff meetings. Y'all, this is good stuff right here. And they've made some really awesome changes, starting right here. So on page 76, where it's talking about the additional responsibilities that caregivers have, all right? So those that are counted in child staff ratio, those that have direct access to children, you're going to look at this. Number 4 on page 76, provide care that is consistent with the child's habits, interests, strengths, and any special needs. Y'all, this is great. I love it. And again, we're focusing on the individual child here. Look at number 6, okay? Set appropriate behavior expectations based on the child's current stage of development. Y'all, I can do a 6-hour training just on that line right there. Set appropriate behavior expectations based on the individual child's current stage of development. Y'all, this was so desperately needed to be carved out right here. And again, we need to have a lot of conversation about this. We need to be lending a lot of skills to our teachers on the current stage of development and what are the age appropriate expectations for that child. But that's good stuff right there. Okay? All right. Yes, I love it too. All right, over here on 1205, so on page 77, what responsibilities do caregivers have when supervising children? They basically, y'all, they completely rearranged all of this. There are a few additions, but it's kind of the same wording. It's just in a different order, all right? So yeah. Oh, Mandy's asking, do I do age-appropriate classes for teachers? Of course I do. I have quite a few of them. Right there. So you can kind of check out my website for that. All right. So the biggest thing on 1205, again, they've just kind of rearranged how this looks. In my opinion, I think that this looks much better. It reads better. It flows better. So if you're doing a training with your staff on supervision, wonderful handout right here. What you're going to see added, which I think is very critical, is number 6 on page 77. When deciding how closely to supervise a child, the caregiver must consider the child's physical, mental, emotional, and social needs. Y'all, beautiful. Beautiful. I'm so happy that they added this right here. And that is so incredibly important when determining the engagement of the child, the supervision of the child, meeting the child's individual needs, creating that felt sense of safety so that the child can be in an optimal state of learning. This is huge right here. And again, I've got a lot of trainings on this particular subject. I can refer you to a lot of other trainings right here. So this is great stuff. All right. All right. Going over to professional development right here. There's no big changes in professional development. Our professional development expectations is actually a piece of legislation that it was signed into law. So the only way child care regulations can actually change the professional development requirements is through an act of legislation. So there's some wording changing in here. There's some clarification in here. But as far as training hour requirements and those type of things, that would have to go through our legislators. Okay. So basically on page 81, it talks about CPR certification. When you hire a new employee, this is over on page 80 if you want to see what I'm talking about. When you hire a new employee, you have 90 days to get their CPR certification, and then they have to stay current with their CPR. They're basically telling you on page 81 under B as in boy that if an employee does not have their CPR certification, then you must have at least one employee or caregiver in the building that does have it. Okay? So somebody in the building has got to have CPR in that case. Now, they still have to get it within 90 days. Okay? But if you do have that newer employee, then you just got to have someone there that has it. Now remember, and again, those of you that have taken my director credential course, we talk about this. It's time for first aid and CPR to get a divorce. You got to separate those two because the requirements are different. For first aid training, they have to have first aid before they can be left alone in a classroom. Okay, so before they can have unsupervised access to children, they have to have first aid training. CPR, totally different. CPR, you have 90 days to get that. Something else I love that they put in here, and again, those of you that know me, I talk about this all the time, all right? Someone on the premises is what it's talking about on page 81. You just have to have somebody on the premises with the CPR certification. All right, on page 82, under your technical assistance box, orientation to your program for new employees should be specific to the individual child care center. All right. And it's going to clarify again, orientation, which addresses employee responsibilities, is different from training. Yes, yes, yes. And y'all hear me say this all the time. All of those topics that are listed under orientation are very specific to your individual school. So yes, I do have these topics on my website, but you have to fill in the blanks with your particular situation. And that's why I've designed a lot of the worksheets and questions to be specific about your school. But you can't just set a new employee behind a computer and expect someone else to orientate them. It's very specific to your operation, all right? So, Letitia, you can call me about your comment. I have something to say about that, but now is not the time or place for it. But I believe there's a discrepancy between CPR and first aid. CPR has to be instructor-led. First aid can be done through self-instructional material, even with CDA. So I think that there's an interpretation conflict right here or a misunderstanding. But this is where, once again, first aid and CPR, time for them to get a divorce. But you can call me and we can talk about that because it's different than what we're talking about here. All right, let's go over to page 87. Once again, under the technical assistance boxes, this is really good, once again, where it's talking about regarding paragraph B1, annual training in child growth and development. They've done a really nice job of breaking this down. Child growth and development includes the major domains of child development, such as cognitive development, social development, emotional development, physical development, and approaches to learning. So that's a good clarification right there. And I'm gonna, I've got some training coming up that I'm gonna be doing on each of those core areas, each of those domains. So kind of be on the lookout for that. And then also, it's gonna talk about under that E, under your required trainings, this is the one that has really rocked everyone's world. So like when you go back to like E as an elephant on page 84, where it says, while there are no clock hour requirements for the topics in this subsection, your annual training must include the following topics. That sentence has always confused people. Your training in emergency preparedness, preventing the spread of illnesses, administering medication, food allergies, building premises, those do count towards annual training. But what they're saying is that there's no designated number of hours. It basically, how long is it going to take for you to cover these 6 topics? Okay, but they're not going to tell you it has to be 1 hour, it has to be 2 hours. So what you're going to see on page 87 is just some clarification on that. The Child Care Center can determine how many hours the caregiver must have in each of those topics based on the length of the training, the caregiver's job duties, etc. So this was really, really good clarification. We were having some issues around the state with the interpretation of whether or not those counted towards annual training, and they do. All right. Going over to page 93, again, with the training of the director, the training must meet certain criteria. Just again, some clarification on number 6, the director who has demonstrated core knowledge in child development and caregiving, you can train your own staff. You can only train your staff. That's what it's saying on C as in cat, all right? People that are employed by your center. Okay, page 94 and page 95 is pretty big. I've had a lot of phone calls about this from people, okay? Yes, so yeah, you can still use my trainings for all of this, absolutely. All right, so on page 94 and 95, it's going to talk about block training certification. So if you see there at the bottom, B as in boy, okay? If the training is provided through a block certification training, then the training must allocate clock hours to each specific topic covered in that training. And when you go to page 95, it's going to elaborate on that. Block certification training is a training that typically obtained through a single source or trainer and is designed to comprehensively address all or most of the training topics. All right? Look at the last bullet point. The training hours an individual obtains through this program should be realistic, a realistic reflection of the time it takes for an individual to complete the course. For example, a block of 150 clock hours of training cannot be realistically done in 10 days. That would be 15 hours a day of training. So if you're getting training through a block certification, it has to be realistic. I just had a phone call from someone a couple of weeks ago. Let me see how professionally I can say this, okay? She said, how long should it take an employee to complete the 24 hours of pre-service? That was an actual question I got from someone a couple of weeks ago. How long should it take an employee to complete the 24 hours of pre-service? My answer was 24 hours. It should take you 24 hours to complete 24 hours of pre-service training. And so, you got to look at that, okay? All right, so just y'all be careful on that. All right, page 98. Page 98, substitutes, volunteers, and contractors. Again, just nothing new here. It's just clarification. Where it's talking about the training hour requirements, and they gave us this wonderful chart now on page 99 and 100 and 101 to help with your volunteers, substitutes, and contractors. This has been very, very misunderstood for a really long time, and so I think this is really going to help with folks right here. All right, let's go now. We're going to go all the way to page 124. And again, y'all, breathe. You can handle this. This is nothing new than what we've already been expected to do. Everything you see here has always been part of the Americans with Disability Act and the expectations that we have with ADA. They just have it written in the standards now, okay? But it's going to talk about what are my responsibilities when planning activities for a child in care with special needs. And you're going to see this really broken down. You must provide a child with special care needs, with a child with special care needs, with the accommodations recommended by, y'all, and this is huge. Again, this is meant to help us, not burden us. Okay, recommended by a healthcare professional, a qualified professional affiliated with a school district or an early child development intervention program. All right, utilized as recommended any adaptive equipment. All right, and ensure that the children receive intervention services. So if you have a therapist coming in, that they're receiving that. And then ensure that they have activities that integrate children with or without special needs, and then ensure that the caregiver adapt equipment and procedures and a variety of methods used for that child. The big part about this right here, you must provide a child with special needs accommodations recommended by these professionals, not the parent. All right? So a parent can't come in and mandate a modification or an accommodation. It has to be done through a healthcare professional or a licensed professional. So again, y'all, this is meant to help us in this. So I'm going to go back again to that IEP and making sure that we have that IEP right there. Again, y'all watch Facebook. I'm going to be doing some more trainings on this particular subject. We got a lot to talk about right here. We have a lot to dish out so that we can get everybody on the same page. But just don't freak out over this. This is meant to help us. All right? So there you go. Someone's asking about therapists coming in. Do they need training hours or background checks? Let's save that question for another training, because that kind of gets very specific, because you start diving into ADA requirements, and also you got to start talking about, do they have direct access to other children, or are they only doing it with that particular child? There's a lot to unfold right there. But bottom line is that if it is an intervention service that is considered a reasonable accommodation by the Americans with Disability Act, and they're coming in to provide therapy services for an individual child, then you should be good. All right? Now, when they start having direct access to other children, that's when you got to start looking at possible other requirements. All right? But again, there's a lot to unfold right there. All right? All right. And Tracy is saying, they're having some issues with parents having doctors write recommendations for children. Y'all, I'll question those. I will call a doctor's office without violating privacy laws, and say, hey, I need a little bit more information about this note that you wrote me and the intent behind it. And it's pretty surprising where that goes sometimes. And then, if you do have a doctor that's just writing some generic note, there's an integrity issue right there too. All right. All right, let's go over, we're going to talk about basic care requirements for the individual age groups. Again, nothing really big here, just a lot of clarification. On page 134, it's going to talk about furnishing and equipment. So again, an individual crib, cot, bed, or mat for walking infants or non-walking infants under 12 months of age. So just some wording clarification on that one. Nothing new there. Over on page 143, where must an infant sleep? Okay, an infant must sleep in a designated crib, cot, bed, or mat. Okay, so again, clarification here. And remember, they can't sleep in a restrictive device. That's part of our safe sleep practices. So once again, clarifying that. All right. Over on page 144, it's going to talk about exactly that. May I allow infants to sleep in a restrictive device? Only if you have the sleep exception form that is signed by the healthcare professional. All right. So that's what you're going to look at with that. On page 145, the 2427, is where, again, it's going to language change right here. Nothing new. They're just clarifying the language about infants sleeping in a face-up position. B as in boy is going to be big for y'all, okay? So when you're working with your infant teachers, you want to make sure you go over this. An infant who is developmentally able to roll from back to stomach and stomach to back may do so independently after you place them in the crib in a face-up position. So basically what they're saying here is even if the child is able to roll over on their own, you still have to put them in the crib in a face-up position. Now, if they roll over, that's okay. But you can't put them, tummy down or bottom up or whatever. You always need to put the child in the crib in a face-up position. And then what they do from there is whatever is developmentally appropriate for the child. Okay? But I've even witnessed this where I've gone into an infant room and I've observed a teacher putting a child down on their stomach. And I'm like, whoa, 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 whoa. They need to be on their back. Oh, no, they can roll over. All right? They need to do the rolling over. The child needs to do the rolling over. Okay, so that's a big clarification right there. All right. All right, over on page 174, where it's talking about nutrition and food service, it's just going to talk about seconds being available to the children if they request it. So make sure that you're preparing enough food so that there are seconds if the child requests it. When we talk about serving water, that water is served after every snack, mealtime, and during and after active play. So just clarification on the wording, during and after. All right. And then where it's talking about serving beverages with added sugar, you're going to see where it says unless otherwise allowed by the CACFP. So those of you that are on food program, you know what that is right there. Remember, food program supersedes minimum standards because they're federal guidelines, not state. All right? But for the most part, everything complements each other perfectly. All right, over on page 195, we're almost done, y'all. We're hanging in there. We're going to go just a couple of minutes over, but we got this. On page 195, under illness and injury, they have added a infrared temporal thermometer, okay, which is what most of us have been using for a long time now. The oral temperature, the ear temperature, the auxiliary temperature, that's like old school stuff right there. But they added the infrared temporal thermometer, so 100 degrees, accompanied by other behavior changes and signs and symptoms of an illness is when you will exclude the child. So once again, just clarification purposes, they've added that infrared thermometer. All right. Page 201. This is a big one. Page 201, where we talk about safety precautions. What safety precautions must I take to protect the children in my care? Number 7, bottle warmers must be inaccessible to all children and must be used according to the manufacturer's instructions. We've actually had quite a few very significant events around the state of Texas due to bottle warmers not being used properly. So this was a very needed standard. If you are using bottle warmers, make sure that they are inaccessible, make sure that they are being used properly. So that's important right there. All right. Yeah. Under first aid kits on page 211, the only thing that's changed here is the adhesive bandages. It used to say something about multiple sizes of adhesive bandages. It just says adhesive bandages now. So that's not a really big one right there. And then last thing, I do not recommend, someone's asking about crock pots. That is not recommended at all. So definitely you want the manufactured bottle warmers that are designed to warm bottles equally and thoroughly so that you don't have the hot spots in the bottle right there. All right. And so, yeah. Over on transportation. Under 5607, so this is on page 273. It's 272 through 273. All right. What child passenger safety seat system must I use when I transport children? Look at B as in boy on page 273. You must use child safety seats and child booster seats that have not expired. Did y'all know that child booster seats expire? That car seats expire? See, you might have learned something new today, right there. All right. So yes, make sure that if you are using booster seats or car seats, they cannot be expired and they haven't been damaged or involved in an accident. All right. And so for those of you that might be transporting those smaller children and you require those items, you know, make sure you've got that. All right, y'all, that's it. See, I told you. Nothing that's going to rock your world. And pretty much everything we've gone over today, you're already doing it. You're already exceeding it. We've just got some stuff in writing now. Again, go back to my Facebook page yesterday. I posted a link for the commonly asked questions about child care centers with the Americans with Disability Act. This is a wonderful document to help you in your program. Print this out, study it, go over it. I'm going to do some trainings on this, so kind of look out on Facebook for a notification. I'll let you know when I've got this scheduled, but we're going to do some more comprehensive trainings on what are the requirements for child care centers when serving children with special care needs. And I'm also going to schedule a lot more trainings on supporting children with signs and symptoms of special care needs. So I know that this is a hot topic right now. I know that there's a lot of anxiety with what's in the standards. So we're gonna try to support you on that right there. All right. Yeah. So, all right. I'm gonna go ahead. There is the link. I just posted the link for you, those of you that are wanting a certificate of completion for today. Why not? You sat here for an hour and listened to me. So there you go. There is the link for you to do your little quiz. If you haven't visited my website lately, where have you been? We completely redone our website, so it looks a little bit different. You now create a username and a password, and you sign in, and then you download your certificates right there from the website. And you can even log in, and you know, all of your other stuff is there. Anything that you've done since August of 2022. So there is the link. I appreciate all of you. If you have any specific questions or concerns, give me a call or shoot me an email. I will try my best to get back with you. I do have an extremely busy month of March. I think I'm on the road the entire month. But I'm still here for you, and we can help get you in compliance and get you going in the right direction. All right. So, yeah, thanks everyone for joining me today. I really do appreciate y'all, and we'll see all of you very, very soon. All right. Have a fantastic day. Bye.